In this video, we're going to look at how to solve an equation that has rational values. And when I say rational, I just mean that it's written by a fraction, right? So 1 over 3, 7 over 4, 10 over 3, 13 over 8. Those are all rational numbers. So I want to show you how we can go ahead and solve one of these. Now, we are going to be doing it by hand, but I'm also going to be using my calculator to assist me. And I recommend that you use your calculator to assist you, especially if you have trouble multiplying these fractions by hand, like you did back in 7th and 6th grade. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we would approach this. First, I want you to keep in mind, as always, when we're solving equations, we want to keep our variables on the left side of the equation. And we want to keep our constant values, that's those that will be written in pink. Notice that the constant has no variable, so we call it a constant. And you want to keep the constant values on the right side of your equation. And then the last thing is, we need to keep this balanced. So whatever we do to one side, we got to do to the other side. So I'm going to write the word right here, balance. So we want to balance it out. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we need to do first. The first thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of this parenthesis, right? This distributive property. So I'm going to put right here, first, distribute. Now, never start a problem if you have not distributed the value that's in the outside of the parentheses. It'll make it much more difficult, and if you do it this way, it's going to be very easy to solve, and other than the calculations, right? But our calculator is going to do that work, so it's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to circle this number outside of the parenthesis, because that's the number I'm going to be multiplying to the inside of the parenthesis. Now I'm going to draw an arrow just showing that it's being multiplied. And I'm going to write out the steps so you can see it. For instance, this is going to be 1 over 3 times negative 7 over 4. So I am rewriting it, but I just want you to see that when I draw that arrow, really I'm just creating a multiplication problem. 1 over 3 times negative 7 over 4. Now I'm going to make this little kind of V thing. It just shows we're putting these two together. We are going to find a product of those two values. So I'm going to take my calculator and move it up so you can see it. And I'm going to turn it on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and we're going to use our alpha button and then our y equals button. And notice you'll get this option, this menu here, right? And it shows a little fraction bar. I like to call this a fraction bar. N divided by D. So I get this little fraction bar, and I'm going to put in the 1 over 3 first. So 1 over 3. And then click to the right to get out of the denominator. Then I'm going to hit the multiplication sign on my calculator. And then I'm going to go ahead and do alpha y equals again and enter to get my second one. Now notice on this second one, right, we do have a negative sign that's in front of it, so it's negative 7 over 4. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in real quick. So we have negative 7 over 4. Click to the right, and now I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to multiply it for me. And notice that gives me negative 7 over 12. So I'm going to move this over. So this became negative 7 over 12x. And you know, I almost forgot to put my x after that 7 over 4. Let me write that down. So always make sure, right, this one has a variable. But when you multiply it, notice I didn't put the variable in it. Notice all I multiplied was the numbers, right? And then after I wrote my answer, I went ahead and put my variable after it. So we're almost done. Let's do this next one. We're going to distribute 1 over 3 to this positive 1 inside a parenthesis. So now we have 1 over 3 times positive 1. Now you could put this in a calculator, but in all honesty, I hope that you remember that anything times 1 is just itself. So this is just going to be positive 1 over 3. Now we haven't done anything to this negative 10 over 3x, but I am going to bring it down. And we're going to combine it with the negative 7 over 12x in just a moment. So what I like to do is each time that I'm solving one of these problems, and I know if you're looking at this, it does take a lot of paper if you do it the way that I do it, but I really like to show every step and keep everything lined up nice and neat. Because the moment that I forget to line something up or bring it down, I forget about it. And then I may get the answer wrong. So if you're like me, I would recommend that you always bring everything down and just do it in small increments, step by step. Now, when I say that I was going to put some terms together, I want you to notice that I have this negative 7 over 12x, and I have this negative 10 over 3x. So we call these like terms. So I am going to put these together and combine them. And when I say combine, I'm going to add negative 7 over 12 to negative 10 over 3. So let me go ahead and get my calculator. I'm going to use my function of my calculator for those again, right? I'm going to do alpha y equals, enter, and I'm going to put in my first value. So I have negative 7 over 12. And then I'm going to add that to, so plus, and then I have negative 10 over 3. So put that in, 10 over 3. So you can see I have it just as I wrote it out, negative 7 over 12 plus negative 10 over 3, hit enter, and it gives me negative 47 over 12. So when I combine those two, I get negative 47 over 12x. And that technically gets rid of these two because we have just combined these two values together. Now at this point, I'm going to bring down my 1/3. We haven't done anything with it yet, plus 1 over 3. Going to extend my equal sign line so I remember to keep this balanced. I'm also going to bring down my negative 13 over 8. Notice we haven't done anything to it either, but we're about to. Now remember, I told you in the beginning, one of our goals that we had is that we wanted to make sure that the variables are on the left and the constant values are on the right. So notice, right, we combined negative 7 over 12 and negative 10 over 3, and that gave me negative 47 over 12. I simply brought down the 1/3, and I brought down the negative 13 over 8. So now we're ready for our next step. So let's go to the next step. I'm going to move my camera down just a little bit so you can see everything well. Now, I want to get this constant value of 1/3 away from my x, because my goal is to get the x all by itself. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use inverse operations to move this over. So let me go ahead and do that. Now, when I say inverse, notice this is adding 1/3 to the x value. So I'm going to do the opposite of adding, which is subtracting 1/3. Now, I'll need to do this on both sides of the equation. So minus 1 over 3. Since I'm moving a whole term over, that's why I'm doing these inverse operations, and we're subtracting it. Now those cancel, and that's just going to become 0. So we got rid of our constant values on the left. Now this right here, negative 13 over 8 plus negative 1 over 3. I'm going to combine those two terms. And that's why I said plus, because we're actually combining them. So let me go ahead and put that in. I'm going to hit negative, and I'm going to do alpha y equals enter, and we're going to do 13 over 8. And then we're going to do plus negative alpha y equals and 1 over 3. So that's negative 13 over 8 plus negative 1 over 3. And it gives me negative 47 over 24. So negative 47 over 24. Extend that down. So all we have now for our constant value is this value right here, negative 47 over 24. But notice we also have this over here on the left side, which is negative 47 over 12x. Now we only have one more step to do. And let's go back and just kind of look at what all we did. We distributed, right, to get rid of our parentheses right here. Then after we distribute it, we then combine like terms. So I'm going to put second combine like terms. Now there won't always be terms to combine, but you should do that before you start moving anything back and forth on the other side of the equal sign. Once I finish that, third, we used inverse operations. And that was to move this constant value over to the right. And last, we're going to isolate the variable. So I'm going to go ahead and put my last step. I'm going to put fourth, isolate x. Now it doesn't matter what variable it is, you want to isolate it. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. So isolate x. Now the way we isolate it is we got to get rid of this value in front of x. We want x to just be 1x. In other words, we want to have x is equal to something. Now to isolate it, we just divide by the same value, by our coefficient. In other words, this is going to be negative 47 over 2 or 47 over 12 divided by negative 47 over 12. And anytime you divide a number by itself, it just cancels out and becomes a positive value. So in other words, this x just becomes 1x. And while I could write a 1 in front of the x, I don't have to, because in math it's implied. In other words, every time you see a variable, there's an invisible 1 that's in front of it. Now I'm going to go over to this right side, and I'm going to divide negative 47 over 24 by negative 47 over 12. So this may look confusing, so I'm actually going to use a different color pen here for a second to break it up. So what we really have is we have this fraction on top being divided by this fraction on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in my calculator, and it'll take care of it real quickly. And we're going to type this into our calculator so it can take care of that work for us. I'm going to hit alpha y equals and enter. That gives me my fraction bar, and I'm going to put the first fraction in the numerator. So I'm going to hit alpha y equals again and enter so I can get a fraction in the numerator. And I'm going to go ahead and type in negative 47 over 24. And then I'm going to go to the denominator. Notice I click down to the very bottom box, and I'm going to hit alpha y equals again because we have a fraction in the denominator as well. And I'm going to do negative 47 over 12. So negative 47 over 12. So notice I have a fraction being divided by a fraction. So I'm going to hit enter, and it gives me positive 1/2. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to write 1/2. And that is my final answer. X is equal to 1 over 2. Now you know everything that you need to know to be able to solve one of these types of problems. Don't rush it. Take your time and use that calculator to help you out with the operations if needed.